And it's something they'll definitely do if it's within a reasonable time limit, like 30 minutes or less, and then also if there's some sort of incentive.
Depended upon what the survey was about.
I take them if it looks like, I don't know, like I feel like I'm contributing to science when I do it. I don't know, I feel like I get emails all the time about like surveys to take. Sometimes I take them.
If I think I'm benefiting a good cause, I'll take it. If I don't, then I probably won't take it. Yeah.
I don't think it will matters a lot, right? Because I don't know why people do survey actually. Because you know people will like not do them seriously, so I don't know. Yeah.
This is a little something I learned from Karl Rove. If you want to guarantee the results of a survey, you design the question to give you the answer that you want.
I feel like they're always going to be put in a way that people can say what they want.
I think you have, in surveys, you have people that will give a response that isn't necessarily what they truly think, and they'll just do it to maybe either make the survey look good or maybe make the survey look bad, depending upon what the topic is.
I feel like people lie on them a lot.
A lot of people are going to give you false answers, or they're not going to answer at all.
I think it can be good if the survey is crafted well, and if it's not crafted very well, then sometimes the results that you get can be misleading.
Welcome to New Orleans, everyone. Woo! Oh, come on, you could do better than that. There we go. All right. So since New Orleans is a special city, we decided to do something a little different this year and kick off the conference with a plenary. I know there are some traditionalists out there that are really into the evening plenary, and we're looking forward to having that after dinner. So if you're in that group, if you could set your watch ahead to 8:30, I think you'll be good to go. So welcome, everyone. I want to, first of all, thank Jen Dykema. Jen, stand up for a minute. Jen, conference chair, organized the whole thing. Fantastic, thank you. And her conference chair in training, Trent Buskirk. Where's Trent at? There you go, Trent. So we are going to kick things off with the plenary looking at kind of the broader trends that are taking place today in how we measure attitudes and behaviors. And we have together here a fantastic panel. I'd like to briefly introduce John Dick, who is founder and CEO of CivicScience, and First AAPOR. You're attending?
First AAPOR.
All right. Claudia Dean, Vice President at Pew Research Center. Margie Omero, who is the Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at PSB Research and the founder and co-host of The Pollsters. And a gentleman that we found outside off the street, the man in the street. Mr. Peter Miller, who is, of course, a senior researcher at for survey measurements at the Census and a AAPOR past president. So,
First AAPOR.
And I'm Michael Link. I'm the Vice President of Data Science Surveys and Enabling Technologies at Apt Associates, and I will help to facilitate the panel here over the next 90 minutes. And we want to focus on, I was told it was climate change, right? We're talking about climate change. It's really freaking hot outside, and it keeps getting hotter and hotter the longer I'm here. I mean, we've seen the things getting hotter and hotter in the temperatures outside, and it certainly seems, though, that survey participation has entered something of an ice age. And what we want to really look at are what are some of the broader trends? What's going on here? What can we do about this? And Peter, you've given this some thought. I don't know if you can give us a little bit more on the concept that we want to talk about here.
So, Mike, as you know, I'm sitting here because Roger Tarango, our president and visionary, asked me to serve on a task force on improving the social climate for surveys. And over the past several months, we've been thinking about this, and I'm going to speak largely for myself because the task force hasn't done what its work, but we're thinking about this as the social and economic and political conditions within which we try to do our work of measuring society. And these are the the macro conditions that affect survey participation or participation in any sort of social research. So it might include things like societal trust that, as Robert Putnam pointed out several years ago, was in decline. Attitudes toward institutions, toward science, toward the value of participating in science. Fear of crime, fear of hacks, etc. Economic circumstances, time demands, things that impinge on people's lives and make it more difficult for them to take time for us to take time to participate in our work. I think it's fair to say, we as a field have done a lot of work on more proximal, micro-level determinants of survey participation. We have studied incentives, we've studied advance letters, we've studied doorstep invitations, we've studied all sorts of things that are right next to when we ask people to respond. We have spent a lot less time, and it's reasonable that we would have missed this. We've spent a lot less time on the larger questions, the larger climate in which folks live. And so, in fact, there's one of our prominent AAPOR past presidents, a guy named Groves, recently said that we do not have the tools to handle the large social forces that are affecting participation. The task force is charged with developing those tools. Is that good?
That's good. That's
Okay,
good.
thank you.
Yeah. So what we want to do with this, setting the stage for the next couple of days, is really talk at that macro level, as Peter pointed out, and some of those broader trends. Really thinking about two big groups. One is the respondents, general public out there. How do they view us these days? I mean, we can look at some of the metrics we have, but how do they really view research? Where are they at in their thinking? Some of these larger trends that seem to be pushing against, in particular, survey research, how might we address those? Is this a kind of a hopeless situation? Or how are we going to evolve? Clearly, there are new tools out there. There's actually, I find the time very exciting right now with all the new things that we can use to measure attitudes and behaviors. But how are we going to adapt, particularly like an AAPOR audience, where we have focused in one area for most of our careers, and now we need to make a shift to adapt to the changing world. So respondents in the public, the other area that we want to focus on is clients, the folks that actually pay for the research, the end users, however you define clients, the end users of those data. How are they viewing us? How are they viewing the product that we're developing, the tools that we're using, the speed at which we are or are not changing? So we want to focus on those things. And the way we're going to run the session is we've come up with 4 basic areas that we want to focus on. One is declining trust, and what is that doing, and how might we address that? The second is the rise of just kind of the data culture. All of this data that's out there, big, large, administrative, how do we utilize those? What is the impact on surveys? What's the impact on our ability to do research? The third is kind of new methods, new approaches. What are we seeing there? We're seeing a lot of things coming out. And last but not least, how might we be able to affect some of these macro trends? So let's talk first about trust.
Donald Trump has been president-elect for almost 24 hours now, and folks are still talking about what happened with the polls running up to this race.
What a night. And a complete earthquake. This was an earthquake unlike any earthquake I've really seen since Ronald Reagan in 1980. It just came out of nowhere.
Almost every poll failed to predict Donald Trump's winning the presidency of the United States over Hillary Clinton.
The polls were wrong, really dramatically.
Brexit polls.
The pollsters have got it wrong again.
The 2014 U.S. congressional elections polls.
Where did the Democrats in the White House get this wrong?
Polls in Israel, Greece, Scotland. Wrong, wrong, and wrong.
So let's get right to this, kind of the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is the recent election. And reports back and forth about whether the polls worked, the polls didn't work. Now, recognizing that we've got, I think I counted 17 different sessions over the next couple of days, they're going to dig into lots of the details at the micro level. But if we think about the macro level, Margie, you've been thinking about this quite a bit and talked quite a bit about this topic. What kind of are you seeing in this particular area?
I mean, the conversation about what happened with the polling, it hasn't stopped. I mean, it continues, and it probably will continue until we have until the midterms or the next presidential election. For folks who haven't read the AAPOR report about what happened, you should. There's nothing I could add to that in terms of the detail and breadth of that report in terms of doing the tests and the analysis to figure out really, is it the accuracy of the polling that was a challenge or the interpretation? But I can't really overstate the hit that the industry has taken in Washington, at least. And it's not even just the people who work in politics. It's like every cab driver, every person you meet on a plane, every hairdresser. I mean, like literally every single person that you talk to that was, will say, hey, what happened in the Wisconsin polls? Why did that happen? I mean, it is such a massive concern where you have every candidate running for office wants to know why the polls were different and than what people expected. So it is still a real major challenge. When I entered this business 20 years ago, there were a lot of candidates who said, I don't know if I need this polling thing. I can just go to the grocery store and I can talk to people and I got to have a good handle on it. I don't know if I need that. And then that's no longer the case. People running for office all know that they need polling. There's an incredible amount of coverage of polling that didn't exist when Mark Blumenthal, who I know is here, started pollster.com years ago. Now there's a whole industry of coverage of polling. So that has changed. But the trust in polling and the reliance on polling that didn't exist 20 years ago and then bloomed may now be receding. So I think the challenge is one, having some wins that are predicted correctly, and also finding other demonstrations of the value of polling and public opinion research beyond simply having the horse race number.
So picking up on that, so one of the things that always concerns me is, quite a few folks here don't actually do political polling. Certainly not election polling. And so it's been easy, I think, over the years for people to go, look at our colleagues and go, you poor folks. And but we're fine. We're doing policy research. We're doing other types of research. What do you all feel about, is there blowback from this very public, the election polls are the visible part of our industry. Is there blowback to the types of other work that we do in the survey industry?
I feel like the sort of the benefit of middle age is having lived through many of these cycles. I remember Andy Kohut, one of my mentors, saying that, he knew that the last thing that would be said about him is, here lies Andy Kohut. He got New Hampshire wrong in 1982 or whatever it was he did. We live and die by what we get right and wrong. I think the declining trust is sort of bigger than this election. When I was thinking about Peter's task of how do we improve our reputation, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to look into some of the sort of public service advertising. I mean, these public health people, all the time, they're trying to change massive, societal views about different activities and behaviors. And so I pulled up one of the PSAs on smoke, how you change the smoking. Number one, get the people who use your data as partners to represent you. I'm like, great, okay, let's see. Politician? No, not them. Media? No, also not very popular. Well, government uses us a lot. Great. So we have to think about, who we can get to speak on our behalf, but to some extent.
I mean, didn't Pew do a poll saying what grade would you give pollsters and the media, and pollsters, and both groups did terribly, got an average grade, I think, of a D, maybe pollsters just a hair, like a D plus or something like that, relative to the media. That was in around December or January. That was kind of in the immediate aftermath. But those are folks who are not necessarily following the day-to-day of what's going on in Washington, but they have enough of an opinion of polling, and I don't know how that affects response rates, but it does certainly affect the views of what people think about the polls, and the sense that whether it's science, whether it's public opinion, whether it's authority, whether it's any kind of expert advice, it's all, it's all a little bit amorphous and hard to trust.
I agree.
So thinking about trust in polls themselves seems to be kind of I don't know if it's the last nail in the coffin, but certainly one of the most recent ones. But it seems like we've been having a downward trend for almost 20 years now. And it seems like there's more than just trust. There's been technology development. There's been kind of a social shift away from just even interacting, not just with pollsters, but interacting with other people in society. And I don't know, the kind of the Facebook culture, I'm not answering the telephone culture for anybody. No, it's not just pollsters. Answer the telephone for anybody. What are you seeing with these kinds of shifts? Can anything be done about those?
Well, I mean, I think it's arguable whether we're interacting less. We're interacting in different ways. I mean, we're interacting online more. Half of you are on your phone, tweeting out, or a new word I learned, tweckling, which is heckling us via Twitter. So. FYI, we can all see that after, so I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if you want to shift the discussion this way, but when I think about the climate, I think, Jen tried to ask us to go biggest picture, and so I watched a lot of sci-fi movies, and now I'm afraid of robot overlords. But aside from that, when I look at the big picture, I feel like we're a culture that's become obsessed with data. Every business wants it. Every kid in school wants to understand how to manipulate it. Okay, we produce data. We're a culture that's become always on, always online, always on our phone. We don't turn our phones off. Okay, that's all producing data. So we have these and then, I was working election night like a lot of people here and was, sitting there next to Scott Clement and Emily Guskin, and, the TV monitor is saying, this is a career-shattering night for pollsters, and we're all trying to go down lower in our seats. And then the next day, everybody's just talking about the polls again. The same media people who are trashing it the next day are reporting out, okay, day one of the Trump administration, here's what the polls say. So apparently we can be quite schizophrenic about it.
That's right.
I mean, were the polls really that wrong? I mean, we're talking about projections of a 3% Clinton win nationally, and that's pretty much what ended up happening. I think it feels like a lot of it's just messaging, that we maybe haven't communicated well enough how bad we didn't do in November. And I know when you ask about what trust with the corporate clients, which tend to be my audience more often, I don't think there's as much blowback. I think what a corporate decision maker is doing is synthesizing a lot of different data points to make a decision. They're not, if in a corporate environment, if you're making a multi-billion-dollar bet on a 51-49 survey outcome, you're an idiot. I don't care what methodology was used and how precise it was. But in politics, if it's 50.1 to 49.9, we're stuck with the consequences for 4 years. I just think the stakes are a lot higher in politics. I don't think it's a trust factor in the corporate space. I think there's competition for mind share in the corporate space, which is different, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But I don't know. I think we're beating ourselves up a little bit more than we probably should. And I know I'm new to this audience, so maybe that's
it's kind of what we do.
Taboo to say, but. I haven't been beaten down enough.
Yeah. I mean, there's an endless appetite for self-flagellation.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know how many people are listening to the Pollsters podcast, but we got a review recently where someone said, I wish you guys would spend more time talking about what went wrong with the polls. I'm like, there's probably no topic we talk about more, aside from Donald Trump, of course. So and it turns out that was timed coincidentally with the AAPOR report, so we got to give that guy his wish to talk fully the full report. But yeah, it's that argument, that counter argument, I think works a little bit, but it's still you still end up having a very long conversation with someone like, well, they were wrong in a couple states, and then you can do this in these states, and the reason was there wasn't enough public polling, even though the internal and then people start to shut down. That's in a political dialogue. That's you would be explaining so much that you are putting yourself at a disadvantage. Because ultimately, the easier story for people to internalize is the entire world thought one outcome was going to happen, and then a different outcome happened.
So, Peter, I'm kind of curious you have a unique position in that kind of representing government broadly. You're both a consumer, a client of a lot of data collection efforts, but then also at Census, you are a collector of data and getting ready for the biggest data collection effort, and you're getting ready to run into this headwind. What's the temperature at Census?
Well, so you're right. I mean, we do have folks who provide data for us, but we're largely a huge data production machine. We're the biggest field operation, right? So I don't think that the people's views of political polls really affect the way we do our work, but at the same time, people's views of surveys writ large has the same sort of effect on us as it does on commercial folks or folks in the political sphere. I was going to mention this later, but if you think about the social media discussions about polls or about surveys and so forth, I was looking online for groups on Facebook that had something to do with surveys that we do. There is no group of former American communities, American Communities Survey respondents. There is a group dedicated against the American Community Survey. So we're suffering from the same sorts of circumstances that other folks do, I guess.
So the question becomes, so I'm trying to sort out here. Am I hearing that you guys seem to be saying that yes, there's potentially a trust issue, it's playing out in response rates, but other than that, it's something that we've been dealing with all along, and we'll just continue to do what we've been doing?
Well, no, I don't think it's just trust. I mean, I think there are views of institutions, views of the government, which affect whether people want to participate in government surveys, right? Regardless of whether they think the survey is valuable, they may just not like the government, and that makes a big difference to us. That's why I think the climate part, the political culture, is a big piece of the climate that we need to consider.
I just think it's bigger than just trust. I mean, I think there's so many things going on. There's so many more demands on people's time. There's so many more electronic temptations that it's not really just how they feel about us. I agree, they don't seem to like us much. If we want to get super practical about it, one thing Peter's committee suggested in their report is we should do something to improve the state election surveys. If, the point of Courtney and team's work is, hey, the national poll's okay, the state polls, they're not comprehensive enough, there's not enough of them, they don't do them enough, well, then you're right, we need to try and fix them. And then that's just a collective action problem on a major scale. But we could certainly try and brainstorm around that.
So one of the things I keep, the theme a number of you were touching on, and we can just shift to this right now, which is talking a lot about social media. And I've always been struck by the fact that, you're right, while response rates have declined to surveys, the fact is now that more and more people are expressing their views on whether it's expressing it to friends and family on Facebook or it's expressing it to the world on Twitter. More and more people want to engage in that activity, just not the activity perhaps that we're asking them to participate in. So let's watch a little clip about big data and kind of talk about that.
Do you want to know what it is? Take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So which pill did you take? So big data. We were talking earlier this morning about how big data, that it's simply a buzz term. We need a better term, because the fact is, as you point out, Claudia, we're in a data-rich environment now. Data is being produced by just about every mechanical thing that's out there, whether it's passive or it's more active in terms of producing information. And we're now starting to be able to leverage those data to understand how we might be able to take some of that information and certainly perhaps look at behaviors. And maybe if we're tricky enough, we can even start to infer some attitudes, maybe opinions, based on the type of data. But I think a lot of work that's being done really is looking at how can you combine these various types of big, small administrative data with survey data and to get the best of both worlds. And Claudia, you guys have been doing a lot of work at Pew on this, and what are your thoughts and what are you all seeing?
But first, I got to say, watching you guys watch The Matrix was pretty funny, because your faces were just like, or like, please don't turn it off. I love that movie. Sorry, we can watch it later. That's what I tell my kids. You can watch it later. So here's my story on this. When I came back to the Pew Research Center 3 years ago, there have been a sort of quick series of job transitions, and I found myself in this slot where I was in the office of, and clearly we need to go to therapy about this because we are somewhat obsessed with Bob Groves. Bob Groves, for those of you who don't know him, former Census Bureau Director and longtime JPSM professor. And he is on our board, and my code name for him, I hope he's not here, is Yoda. And he like stares out the window and always gives us these pronouncements. And he basically was like, big data, get you bust, and then he just shoos us out, and then we just go away. And like, all of a sudden, I've got this folder on my desk of like, okay, I've solved this problem. And here's what I've managed to learn in 3 years. Number one, it turns out it's not one thing. If you thought you could go to the Best Buy and get a kit for this, it's not true. The term itself, John has already told us he has a swear jar in his office.
Swear jar in the
because
office.
you can't use it. It's not a thing, right? So what we're talking about is a multiplicity of tools, including things like network analysis from sociology, where you figure out who knows each other and who follows each other and what they do online, and things like machine learning, where you can use a computer to interpret text that you find online from like social media networks, and different data sources, including history. So that's one thing. Two, it's super multidisciplinary in a way that, yes, AAPOR we are from a bunch of different fields, but this adds a whole group of people, computer scientists mainly, who will need to merge in with us. And we speak the same language in a lot of ways, but sometimes we call different things by different names, and it causes some confusion. But I think we can work past that. Three, it's iterating really fast. So if you figure out what the top thing is to learn right now, or you have a college kid and you want to tell them to learn Python, that might be fine, but I don't know what they'll need to know in 5 years from now. And that's maybe a challenge for those of us who are used to mastering one technology or statistical set or skill, or we think SAS is going to be the tool we continue to use. I don't know. Fourth, the tools are actually outstripping our access to data. Getting access to this data, it's super hard and messy for really boring human reasons, like the lawyers at the places who have the data don't really want to give it to you, or the comm shop is worried that when you do research on it, you're going to somehow embarrass the company or individual. So we've had a lot of trouble with that. And finally, I think it is just much better at measuring behaviors than attitudes. Sorry to go on so long, but it was a big file folder by the end. But by the end of my project.
So I'm curious, with the folks here, how many folks here have used routinely some other form of data other than surveys in your work? How many of you feel like you have data science groups or folks in your organizations these days? Whatever that term actually means. Okay, so we're seeing a larger and larger group. And, so the question really becomes, it's been interesting. The last few years at AAPOR, we've been having more and more sessions on data science, big data. But like you point out, it really is just broadening into these new areas of data that are out there. And the history of survey research, we've actually been very good at taking new technologies over the years and bringing them in. It's been interesting because I haven't seen, some folks have very much embraced these new types of data and looking at. Others, though, I've noticed at AAPOR really putting up a, not in my shop kind of approach, and it's really kind of interesting. And be interested in your views on that. What should we make of that? Where should we go with that? Is big data something to fight, or is it something to embrace?
Well, so I mean, there's a committee of the statistical agencies of the federal government called the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology, and at our last meeting, we were charged with developing quality indicators for non-survey-based information, and they have a fairly tight timetable and so forth. To me, I'm not speaking now. I should have said this earlier. I'm not speaking as a federal government official today.
Who is really?
Yeah.
Bravo.
That's a good point. Unlike some people, I could get in real trouble if I said certain things. But anyway, I looked at this and this piece of paper, and I said, well, the task of building useful, routine, statistical information for policy purposes out of non-survey data is at least as hard or more hard than solving the problems that surveys have now. And people who are advocates of just pitching surveys grossly underestimate the difficulty. So I guess I find myself in that camp that says, if we have good non-statistical non-survey information that we can blend with survey data, that makes sense to me. As long as the measurement properties are correct for the purpose that we want them. But to simply say forget about surveys, we're going to move into this data science stuff, I think it's buzzwords.
I should have brought my swear jar here. I'd be rich. I think that's the key point, though. And this is going to be really ironic because I'm supposed to be like the new methodology rep on this board up here, but I'm going to espouse the virtues of survey research and shit all over big data for a minute. But can I say that?
We'll
sorry,
bleep you.
Sorry, bleep me out. There's a lot of really bad big data out there. If you look at, we study a lot of analytics data online, digitally attributed data about people that are used for ad targeting and so on. If you've ever been to Blue Kai, you can go there and see what Blue Kai thinks they know about you, or Google, and it's wrong. I mean, there's a lot that's right, but there's an enormous amount that's wrong, what they infer about you or impute about you based on your web browsing behavior. And nobody seems to talk about that. There are billions and billions of dollars of digital advertising spent on the basis of information that is just enormously. If any of us presented survey data to anyone that looked like that data did, we'd all be run out of the building. And for some reason, they seem to be getting a pass on that. And I don't think that's going to last for long because there's too much money being misspent as a result.
But the question is it going to get better over time? I mean, I think it will. I think, we increasingly are having different sets of people who need to interact together to figure that out. And some of them may be people here. Like, how do you determine whether an estimate is good or not? It requires some of the skills that people in this room have acquired over time, understanding population, understanding representativeness, measuring for bias. I think all that's relevant. But I mean, I think, I don't think we should dismiss it out of hand.
I'm not suggesting that we are.
Look, I'm a survey person.
Yeah, I know.
You
Let's
got me,
just change hats
flipping,
for a minute.
Yeah, right.
I just think that we need to apply the same rigor and standards to that kind of data that we're applying to survey data.
Correct.
And I think far too few people are doing that and making fairly irresponsible decisions on heavily flawed data.
Yeah,
go
ahead.
Well, the other thing too is we should be looking at big data or other kinds of emerging methodologies. There's tons of experimentation going on out there in a similar way as we look at qualitative. Like, these are methodologies that have to be done if you want deeper understanding, figuring out the drivers, the motivations, and different ways of capturing public sentiment other than a survey. And from the political world, sometimes it's hard because people are wanting, something that tells them the answer. The answer is how many people are voting for my candidate, and how are they going to vote on election day? If that's not, how is that different from where they are today? And that's what they want to know. Everything really ladders up to that research question. So some of these other methodologies, if they can't provide that answer, that button that people want pressed, then they're wondering, is this worth it? Is this, is this a kind of methodology I need? That's why qualitative always gets a back seat, unfortunately, for a lot of political work, even though it is incredibly important. And big data, it has been seen as perhaps that's the answer. Maybe that can give me the answer that I'm looking for, can really answer that, fill in that button, fill in that question mark that people want more than any other question they want answered.
Yeah, so a little shameless plug. So the session at 4:30, there is a session on a National Academy of Science report that just came out that looks at, from the government perspective, all the different types of data that are out there that are non-survey data, and how might they be able to be leveraged and pulled in. So 4:30, you guys could go check that out. But one of the things that's interesting there is, again, I think even we're falling back into using the buzzword big data. The reality is, as you pointed out, there's lots of different data, and it goes along different dimensions. And structured is one that you can do. So you have administrative data that might be well organized, easy to work with on one end, and on the other end, then you have the Facebook to Twitter, the unstructured data, Instagram being the perhaps the ultimate thing. I'm always fascinated with picture data these days, because if you think about it, we've got a whole generation of people that are now communicating in visuals. They're certainly not talking on the phone. They're rarely even texting words, but they're sending pictures to each other. And so the whole generation is communicating. We kind of scoff at that, but they're communicating to each other in pictures. That's a huge source of data that's out there. But we have no idea right now really how to pull information out of that and what you would do with that. And the other dimension then becomes access, as you pointed out. Once you start delving into this stuff, you realize it's really hard to get a hold of this stuff. If you take agency data, I remember the few years, my CDC sabbatical a while back, where you couldn't get data really even from one department to another because of some of the bureaucratic things that you talked about, let alone agency to agency or state to agency. And then if you went to commercial data sources, you could perhaps get access to that if you had a value proposition or you wanted to pay quite a bit of money. And so it is a much different kind of playing field than we're used to, and I'm not sure how that works out. One of the concerns that I have in that whole area when I think about the AAPOR crowd, and we've got folks that are in very large shops that have lots of resources, and we have a lot of folks, though, that come from smaller shops. And the question the concern I have is, are we moving into a time period where the small shops simply can't participate anymore, and we wind up losing them?
I'm in a really big shop.
I mean, we've seen the university shops have had economic pressures, other types of things. But I've also had those folks that run those shops come to me and say, how do I can I participate in this kind of big data revolution, this new approach of things that are going on? And what do you guys think about that?
I think it's tough. You're seeing it happen in corporate consumer insights departments as well. They're shrinking and downsizing and reorging, and a lot of it is just that the skills required to keep up are outpacing hiring cycles in these businesses. We were talking at breakfast this morning. We have 20 engineers in our company that I'd never realized until I saw their career arc that they're like athletes. They kind of peak at 29, 30. Then they're too expensive for the skill sets that they have, because there are 22-year-olds graduating Carnegie Mellon down the street that are significantly further advanced in their skill set and half the price. And I mean, not to add to the downtrodden tone of things, but
you seriously brought the mood down.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to do that, but I think that's a difficult problem to solve, because unless you're spending your entire career doing 20 hours a week of study at school, I don't know how you can possibly keep up with it. You've got to be developing management skills and business skills and other skills to augment that. But I think it's hard to scale an organization with those kinds of capabilities.
So, but when I think about these things, I kind of step back and I look at, how are we evolving into this? I think about clients, people, methods, and data. And first question, do we have clients for this? It's great to go down this path, but do you actually have people that are willing to buy this stuff? In the commercial realm, absolutely. My former employer, Nielsen, now relies almost exclusively anymore on the use of set-top box data or scanner data or large piece of information as opposed to using paper diaries in the way of collecting information. That's one large-scale effort. But you take the CDC. We all, I think, have probably read over the years the CDC's use of Google data to track flu. Yes, that had some ups and downs and issues, but it still serves as a very good early warning kind of system for them that they can then combine with other types of things. There was recently the state of Ohio had an RFP out for a group to come in and help them look at some of their agency data, but also then combine that with social media data and some other data that were out there and help them to understand how they could start to leverage that information. So I think from a client perspective, I'm starting to see a growing desire for that. Talk to federal clients. The folks are always asking how can they get into that area. I think the agencies differ. Some are more conservative than others, but I'm sensing a growing push for us as an industry to figure out ways to be able to leverage that. Is that just me or?
No, I think that's right. Taking into account Claudia's caveat that building these products isn't really, I don't think, at root it is not rooted, the difficulty is not rooted in the technical challenges. The difficulty is in the lawyers and the various hoops that one needs to jump through in order to pull these blending operations together. I don't know what it's like from your side of the street to get access to. The point about how we can't from this floor move data to that floor, that's still true in many cases, I think.
I think one thing we sort of suffer from, but potentially eventually benefit from, is just what people's attitudes are towards privacy. I think there's one narrative that we have that people don't want to participate in surveys. They're less likely to because they don't trust us or because they're concerned about their private information. But we also know that, when we look at, you compare yourself to a younger generation and what they might be comfortable making public or having not private is so also changing. And then, in our own research, we find that privacy is a very contingent concept for Americans. And I realize we are talking a lot about the American climate internationally. We're dealing with all sorts of million varieties of this problem. But in the US, people are willing to trade off their privacy for different things. It's just a matter of what are you trading it for? And do I trust the person I'm giving it to? It's not an impenetrable barrier. It's more of a...
I think there is a generational component to that.
Yeah.
We did some research that really showed whether it's 45, 50, whatever that cutoff point is, that folks above that really see their data as something they need to protect at all costs. Because that's the way they'd always been. Folks below that, though, like you said, are much more transactional. It's like, I need to protect my data, but if you're going to give me something, I will allow you to have access to data. I think Facebook is a great, use that as an example, right? If you give me a platform to communicate with my friends and family and relatives, I'll give you, a number of pieces of personal information, my thoughts, some of my pictures, so it is a transactional type of thing. Question is that, with us in surveys, we always translate that into money, I think, right? Just transaction with money. Should we think broader? Are there broader transactional things that we need to be thinking about to again, take advantage of that perhaps broader trend that we see?
I'd like to answer that a little later.
Okay.
I want to challenge the social media listening point a bit, because I think there's a lurking problem that we all need to sort of proceed with caution about, which is how real that data really is. Just because I share it doesn't, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm like the awesomest version of myself on social media, right? Like, I check in at the cool places. I don't check in when I get a hot dog at the gas station. Every picture I've ever taken, I looked great in, right? We portray this curated version of ourselves to the world because we want them to think we're funnier or smarter or more adventurous or whatever. Even when I say something that's self-deprecating, it's just because I want my friends to see how humble I am, right? if we try to view that as a quantitative stream of what the world really thinks, I think that's fairly dangerous because I don't think it's true. And again, I think it's another area of so-called big data. I'm going to be broke. That too many people have sort of like breezed over all the endemic flaws in it. That maybe people like us can sort of bring folks back to reality about a little bit.
But we know this is all going to change. But the thing is, right now, when we're talking about social media, there's only a couple kinds of social media that massive numbers of people are on, right? One is Facebook, and we can't get at the Facebook private data. And trust me, we've tried. It's very hard. They've gotten burned by different research projects, I understand. So really, when you look at what the academics are looking at, it's almost always Twitter. And that's because Twitter is, by default, public. When you go on there, the privacy statement is like, everything you write on here will instantly be seen by anyone in the world at the moment you write it, and that's your privacy policy. It's free and it's public, and that's why everybody is studying it. Like, we don't know what'll come next. I don't know if you have that social desirability bias as much on Twitter, but maybe I follow a super geeky crowd, like these guys.
Have you ever gone back and deleted a tweet after you wrote it because you didn't like the way it sounded, or
I'm too old to know how to do that.
Or put a typo in it? I think there are certainly people on Twitter who don't care what anyone else thinks, that's for sure. But I think that...
But there is those data, again, are fundamentally different in the sense that there's something I like to call the perpetual dynamic algorithm. And what I mean by that, it's a cool term, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
like a band.
Social scientist, that's right, yeah. But what I mean by that is that you've got to remember those platforms are made for a purpose, right? They were made by a company to deliver some service, and oftentimes, underlying that's all delivering ads. But to deliver, whether it's the ability of people to communicate with friends and family or the ability for them to communicate broadly. And what's happening is there's an army of engineers behind the scenes that are always trying to make that platform better. That's their job, right? Is to make the product better. And what's very interesting is then, the question really becomes, we like stable data. We like to know where our data is coming from. And we always like to, certainly in survey research, we like to know from beginning to end, who's sampled, what were the questions, we get down to the fine detail, and yet with these kind of data, we're willing to take them, but recognizing that behind the scenes, with engineers changing the platform all the time, are changes that we're seeing sometimes due to the fact that society is changing in their views, or is it just the fact that the underlying mechanism got changed? I always like to think about this as if you had your caddy programmer, somebody came in and decided, that's not a very efficient script that you have. So I'm gonna move these skip patterns around, but I'm not gonna tell you. And then suddenly you go analyze your data and you're like, wow, what happened here? And you can never dig down deep enough to figure out what was going on there. So I think those data are different in so many ways.
That's a real problem.
And yet they're so rich.
Real problem.
Yeah.
Well, people want to ascribe some kind of, maybe even quantify, broadly speaking, some of that online sentiment. They want a satisfying answer from it when there may not be a satisfying answer from it. And also, it's probably, for a lot of clients, they see it as this treasure trove of sentiment that they would be remiss to not try to harness and massage in a way that's then usable. The downside is we're just not able to really figure out how to fit that into true public sentiment because of all the biases of who's on Twitter, what they say, who they talk to, all the things that are really kind of blindingly obvious. The fact that people are more likely to say things when they're like, they're angry or they're really excited or they're trying to self-edit. So I think a lot of that stuff can really lead corporate work in a wrong direction, and without the ability to say what the wrong direction even is. Like it's just that really presents a lot of challenges. For political work, the online sentiment is usually not something that people are looking to as something to integrate. It's something to monitor and keep track of, but it's not something that people are necessarily thinking of as a measurement tool yet. That might change. I think for a lot of folks, they see, in the political world, that's political Twitter is very strong, but as a voter tool, as a voter sentiment tool, it's something that's really doesn't really gauge where people are.
So yeah, an interesting example when I was at Nielsen of this idea, like you said, of you go into a problem thinking one thing and you come out with another, is when Twitter really first came out and people realized that people were tweeting about shows. There were executives at Nielsen that were like, this is fantastic because we can get rid of all these science folks that are doing all these survey things for us, and all we need to do is buy the Twitter data and we can just measure that, and we can measure ratings, who's watching TV stuff. Well, of course we looked at that and it was like, no, that there's actually very little correlation between the two. But as we dug into it, what we realized was that, hey, it actually gives you some measure of engagement. And that was something that was missing. The clients weren't missing. Clients knew how many eyeballs were watching something, but there was never a good way to know, were people really into it? Twitter became kind of a way to at least give a proxy measure for, hey, if people are tweeting about something, they're really into what it is that they're doing. So it gave them a useful piece of information. Like you said, it's more qualitative than anything else, but it was, I think, an interesting example of, going into the data, looking at the data one way, perhaps not what you thought it might be, but actually coming out with something at the other end that was useful. I want to take cognizant of time, so I do want to switch to kind of a related topic, which is new methodologies and some of the new things that we're seeing. And let's look at a clip here for a second. Several years ago, Rob Santos, past president, gave a great address. One of the lines that I love that Rob used was saying that we have entered into a real methodological renaissance. The fact that there are such a broad array of things that are out there today. We mentioned before, there have never been more ways for people to express their opinions. And as a methodologist, I think there have never been more ways before for us to be able to try to measure. New tools coming out all the time. And I think that's not going to stop as long as Apple and Google keep coming out with new devices that potentially help us measure behaviors. We're going to continue to have some new tools and methodologies. John, you've been doing some very interesting things where you combine surveys with other types of approaches and really been looking and digging into new methods. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I'd like to play moderator for a minute and ask Peter a question, if you don't mind. What traditional survey research? I keep seeing that, like those three words, and I don't know what point in time are we, when somebody says traditional research, traditional survey research, are we talking about diaries mailed to people's home? Are we talking about telephone calls? Because it would seem to me, if you look back 30, 40, 50 years, there's been a fairly constant evolution of method. What do you think the conventional view of so-called traditional survey research is?
Well, at least part of it has to do with the way you invite people to participate. So traditional would, since the 30s or so, would be you select them with a probability method of some sort. Now, there have been obviously variation in the extent to which people attach importance to that, but that's sort of been the normal science. Part of it is asking people questions, and so the study of human interaction is a big sort of piece of that traditional. I guess a third aspect would be that the survey is a tool which is multi-pronged, so that it collects data that are tailored to get at a particular question or two, but also collecting a lot of other data at the same time that can be used to to analyze those particular phenomena, and reanalyzed. So there are surveys that are archived and are reanalyzed by people all the time for purposes other than what they were initially collected for. So I guess, does that help?
Well, I mean, because I've listened to a lot of people talk today, and it feels to me sometimes like the word traditional is a replacement for probability-based. That seems to be
certainly
line.
One big piece of it.
The line of demarcation seems, because the collection method and how I reach people or whatever has evolved a lot since the 30s, but that seems to be the piece that kind of the tipping point. We have kind of the work we do, we have a fairly romantic idea about all of this, that we can still survey people without paying them, forcing them, or tricking them into doing it. We've surveyed 50 million people, have never paid a penny to do it. And there's a lot we can learn about social media in terms of what people's motives are for sharing information that can be encapsulated in a survey paradigm. We can focus on people's want to share. We can focus on people's want to see how they compare to the world around them. We're all narcissists and voyeurists, and giving some results back to people is a pretty good incentive. We try to study that as much as we can. I don't think we've figured all of it out yet, but I don't think there's any reason to give up on the other elements of traditional survey research. I think probability is very tough because, there's certain people that will answer phone calls from numbers they don't recognize, and there's certain people who won't, and there's certain people who have landlines, and there's certain people who don't. Right? So that element of the traditional part of survey research might be a tough thing to recapture, but I think everything else about it is still achievable if we put our heads to it.
I mean, I think one other pressure is the length, right? So if we move to more mobile, or if we're moving to, Snapchat surveys or whatever else may be next, those things are by their nature not going to be very long. And the amount of things that people want to find out, the amount of questions we have, that's not going to get any shorter. When I started in this business, we routinely did telephone surveys that were between 30 and 35 minutes long, which you don't do really anymore. And our methodologist who's here says you really shouldn't do anything more than 10 minutes, which I ignore as advice, because that's just so incredibly short in terms of getting all the things that you want to get. Imagine being restricted to your, are you liking AAPOR so far, yes or no, 2 or 3 question mobile survey. While that you increase your response rate, or you're getting people who may not be in your sample frame in other ways, or may not be interested in your survey and through other methodologies, you are limited by the amount of questions you can ask in those other methodologies, and that will have a huge effect on how people view the acceptance of these different techniques, what we're able to find out, in addition to, even if we solve the problem of representativeness, or how do we project onto the broader population.
Peter, thoughts?
Well, I mean, just to John's point about the probability issue, we still have probability samples by design. We don't always have probability samples in execution, right? So the question then is, well, so how much difference does it make that we have a non-participation by some of the people we invite? I'd invite you to look at the most recent issue, the special issue of POQ, to look at a symposium on this question, because it's clear that one of the solutions that is a real billion-dollar solution to the problems facing surveys is to abandon the probability invitation idea. So we can't, those of us who were trained in the old ways, you can't ignore the fact that this is a big piece of the community now. And in fact, there are people outside of our sphere who have never had the opportunity to do probability research, probability-based research. People in biostatistics and other people who do clinical trials cannot select people at random to participate. Those people have developed methods to deal with this problem, and we need to learn from those methods. Rather than drawing a line saying, well, we do things the right way, you do things the wrong way. We need to find ways to understand when the non-traditional stuff can produce the kinds of data that we would like to see. And there's some interesting papers in that issue that address this problem.
So that to me, one of the things I keep seeing is the pressure. There's cost pressures which are causing people to adopt different types of methodologies. There's the participation issues or lack thereof that are causing people to do that. My question, because you kind of mentioned, how are we going to do these things and maintain the quality that we've had? The question: are we at a tipping point in terms of quality where we're going to have to start talking to clients about perhaps ratcheting that down, or are we going to be able to find methodologies we think that will maintain the quality but do things in a different way?
I think we have to meet some conditions that allow the data that we provide to answer questions in a reliable way. So I think what we're talking about now is thinking about ways of coming up with that solution that we historically have never had to think about or couldn't think about before. So there are ways to think about making population inference from non-probability samples. You have to meet certain conditions, and those conditions are very hard to meet, but they're not impossible. And in some domains, they may even be fairly straightforward. So we need to investigate those things more. Now, let me say, do I think that federal statistics will be based on non-probability opt-in panels? No, I don't. I think we'll still try to do things in the traditional way. And there's good reason to, because probability methods really do solve a lot of problems in inference.
Pew adopting non-probability approaches?
Well, we've got a number of people in the audience who are spending their working days trying to figure out, which non-prob approaches work. And, for those of you in the audience who do those for business or your work, part of the challenge is just the sort of sharing of knowledge of what's your particular method for doing this. This is not something that we're all experimenting with in general in public, and that, I think, is a challenge for the field. So we've been relying on the graciousness of people to sort of give us their data, and we're trying to, Scott and Courtney and Andrew and others are trying to figure out, how does this work? When does it work? Why does it work? And so, I'm sure there's lots of panels and things that you can go to about that. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't think, you asked if we're at a tipping point. I don't think we are. I think all the data I've seen that's been produced, I think, on deadline for this conference, largely suggests that, 2017 is not going to be the tipping point. But 2018, I don't know.
So John, you have a range of clients.
I think it'd be a tragically lazy outcome for us to decide that we're going to reduce our standards of accuracy in the research that we do. It might not be easy, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be a year from now, but to just give up and say we're going to accept some higher degree of error. There's too many smart people going to schools like Carnegie Mellon and MIT and Michigan and others right now that are not aspiring to come out and give half-hearted answers to questions. I think the fact that everyone's here, I don't think 5 years ago a company like ours would have felt welcome in an audience like this, that we're trying to do things radically somewhat different. I'm pretty, if I can say something uplifting for once, I think it's pretty exciting that everybody's so open-minded to these new ideas. And I think you wouldn't be here talking about all of these things if you were willing to sacrifice the quality at the end of the day. And I think there are a lot of folks out there trying to make money selling less than stellar solutions to companies because they can and because the companies will buy a buzzword if it's put in front of them. But I think there's too many other good researchers out there that still care a lot about their credibility and the work that they're doing. So I don't know if our solution's the right one, or SurveyMonkey's, or any of the other folks I know here that are really trying to advance the discussion, but it's out there. I do not believe the answer is something less than perfect.
I'll go along with that.
All right, here.
This is about not just non-probability, but methodologies and technologies. And I'm going to put you guys on the spot for just a second. Putting your crystal ball in front of you, What method do you see? Are you excited about? What kind of approach have you seen that you're excited about, say 5, 6, 7 years down the road that you see coming that's going to help us understand attitudes, behaviors better?
I'm far too biased to answer that question.
Other than your own.
Correct, other than my own. No comment.
That's hard to follow. I'm excited about the challenge of trying to figure out how to use social media data or other kinds of behavioral data to project attitudinal data or to project survey data, because it uses such an interesting combination of new tools and the statistical methods that we already know something about. But I do not minimize the challenge of that. And sometimes it feels a little esoteric and detached from the real world, these kind of modelings and projections. And we're not very comfortable as survey research thinking about imputed data or model data. Not, I guess a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, maybe just me.
So this isn't necessarily a methodology, but in terms of reporting and how we talk about data and convey data for our clients, which is for a lot of us, the final deliverable, the main deliverable, is all of the innovations and changes and development in how we talk about data, how we show it, how we show things simpler in plain language, with data visualization being much more of an established, robust industry now, and where you have a lot of firms that have people who do this more in-house, where I've just seen over the last few years how now that is just table stakes for every company that does this, to make sure what they're talking about is presented in a way that is clear and understandable. And that wasn't something that used to be SOP.
Well, I guess I have a number of thoughts. I'm trying to think which one or two of them I should. So within the traditional realm, where we're doing probability-based surveys, and we're going out and trying to get respondents to agree to participate, I think a positive direction is a recognition that achieving a high response rate isn't the be-all and end-all, that we should be paying attention to the representativeness of that group of folks who we do manage to attract, and we need to monitor that representativeness during the field period and adjust what we do during the field period to attract the people we do not yet have in the sample, the kinds of people we do not yet have in the sample, in the most efficient way. And we're working on that sort of stuff at the Census Bureau, and I think that's an exciting avenue. We call it adaptive design, other people call it responsive design. But we've built the tools over the last 5 years to do this, and we're now actually in the process of testing this on large scale. So it's again in the traditional realm. I actually took I'm sorry to use this term, big data class, and in the course of doing it, I had an assignment, and the assignment was to use these big data, whatever we wanted to look at, in a project. And so I picked up some free Twitter data, and we actually, Gina Waleko and I worked on this paper together, and we looked at these 40,000 tweets or what have you, and what we were looking for were mentions, single word mentions of government, something to do with some words, terms that would focus on the term government. We were trying to create a climate measure. We were trying to see, we were trying then to embed those terms in their context and look at a sentiment analysis and see whether people were putting government in a positive or negative framework. And then we tried to relate that to response. We were going to relate that to response rates, to federal surveys. This is a fairly different way of doing something that Brian Harris, Coteen, and Clyde Tucker did. I don't know, is Brian here? Brian must be here. Yeah. So Brian, you were what, 6 years old at the time? But this is like maybe 25, 30, I don't know, something like that. They did it by looking at presidential approval ratings and the unemployment rate. and trying to see what was the response to federal surveys under these different conditions. I mean, I think we need, and we are to a degree, to use and analyze these tools, these non-survey tools, to understand the climate within which we try to attract people to our surveys. And it may help us in terms of how we display or hand out our resources or allocate our resources and so forth. That's two.
What I'm excited about is having an Alexa in every household, conducting interviews throughout the day and playing whatever the hell song I want at any given time. So,
Mike,
we'll
I do have an answer.
Oh, you do? Okay, go ahead.
I
We'll
actually
go
did
back
have an answer. And Peter touched on it. I think what I'm excited about in the future is companies like ours collaborating with other companies who are using different methodologies to understand the differences between. There are fundamental psychographic differences between a person who answers survey for a financial incentive and a person who doesn't. There's a difference between a person who answers a survey phone call from a number they don't recognize on their cell phone and a person who doesn't. There's a difference between a person who answers a landline phone and the person who doesn't. And I don't know how much research is really being done on what those. We know, for example, that people who answer surveys for some sort of financial incentive tend to be more likely to use coupons when they shop. They tend to be more brand aware, more brand favorable. Right? We know they over-index that way. Of course they do, because they're that motivated by $5 to take a survey. That shouldn't surprise anyone. Are those things accountable and weightable for example, in a way that we can combine those different people that answer surveys for different reasons might need to be blended together in a different way than just saying I'm going to just use a survey panel of people that are paid or just use a survey panel of people that are called on the phone or whatever. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement it's going to take cross-firm collaboration, I think, because so many firms are married to one methodology or another, and I hope that happens in the future. I think there's a lot of ground to be gained that way. So.
Well, before we open it up to questions, so get ready to go to one of the three mics. I do want to bring it back to the man in the street video at the beginning, or the woman in the street video, or the couples in the street video, and back to this idea of climate and the fact that the climate that we're operating in is changing. And Peter, again, you've been working on that task force. Just kind of any closing thoughts that you might give us in terms of can we affect the climate that's out there?
Well, it's an empirical question, right? I think it's incumbent upon us to try to affect the climate. I don't think it's responsible for us to say, well, we just can't do it. I think we have to try. I'm not sure I believed this until I started working on the task force, but now I've been into this for a while. I think we have to. So what could we do? I think we need, as an institute, as an association, to do some broad communication efforts to tackle some issues that may be impeding folks from participating. I think we need to convey the value of research. We need to convey the trustworthiness of the folks who do it, the data protections we have in place, the respondent rights that folks have if they do participate. And I think we can do all of that. We can do some of that through advertising. We can do some of it through social media. I think our own social media, our association's social media could be used more toward conveying these messages to prospective respondents. In our normal work, in our daily work, it seems to me, we could do more. We could do substantially more to express gratitude to the folks who participate. And I think we could do substantially more to inform them about things we find. Not every survey can do this. Not everybody not every organization can manage it. But to the extent possible, we need to change the way we disseminate our results to convey that we could not have done this without the participation of folks out there in the country or around the world or what have you. And we need to recognize those contributions, and we need to give those folks their own particular data products if they want them. So there are examples of this. The Health and Retirement Survey, funded by the National Institute on Aging, produces a regular report to its respondents. The Wisconsin Longitudinal Survey, been going since 1957, produces reports for its for its now fairly elderly respondents, but it has been over the years. The agricultural census, I don't know if you go out in the exhibit hall, you'll see that the National Agricultural Statistics Service is here. They're encouraging folks to participate, the farmers to participate in the upcoming census. How are they doing it? By trying to create a community of folks who are interested in the data for that survey so that they can convey what participation means. So we need resources for message development. If you're following along these, follow me so far. Advertising, coordinating a unified message strategy, branding surveys to indicate that we are doing things responsibly and ethically and so forth. And this event here, I'm hoping, could be the start of a process that we follow to take up some of these ideas and see if they work. But I think we have to try.
Well, I do want to make sure, because we've got a lot of folks here, and I know you guys have some things that you would like to share. So we've got 3 microphones.